Welcome to our webinar, Maintaining Momentum, How States and Private Finance Can Continue to Lead on Clean Energy. I'm Anna Zakulik from RMI, a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to accelerating the clean energy transition. I'm joined today by several colleagues from RMI, Center for Public Enterprise, Milken Institute's Community Infrastructure Center, and S2 Strategies. Apologies. I understand it's taking a bit longer to have everyone in. So we'll just slow down for a second and start at 2:03 if you're Eastern time. I have a note that the sound was a little off. Can people hear me a bit better now? Rachel? All right. Thank you as the one person I can see. All right. Appreciate we're still letting a few people in, but I think we kick things off here. As I mentioned, I'm joined by several colleagues from RMI, Center for Public Enterprise, Milken Institute's Community Infrastructure Center, and S2 Strategies. Besides those joining me on video as speakers, several others will be manning our Q&A throughout the presentations and our later discussion. Next slide, please. So at any time, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A. In addition to direct replies, I'll put several to our panelists later on. We'll share our contact info, so those of you viewing this as a recording, we welcome your emails. All registered participants will be sent the slides and recording. We will also have these posted on our RMI website. So why are we here? Unprecedented federal funding and private investment for domestic clean energy helped catalyze states and local governments in collaboration with their utilities, local businesses, community-based organizations to prioritize which clean technologies and infrastructure they most wanted deployed and manufactured in their backyards. These coalitions developed hundreds of high-impact clean energy plans and projects. To be competitive for those investments, they reformed regulations, identified municipal land for renewables development, trained their workforce, and stood up their own capital. The purpose of the resources and strategies we'll showcase today is to ensure those commitments, the invaluable public and private partnerships, countless hours of coordination behind these projects are capitalized on, so we can unlock the many economic development and energy affordability benefits behind these projects. The federal grant, loan, and tax credit calculus undoubtedly looks very different now for financing these projects, but we are sitting on an impact investment goldmine. Many of these projects are shovel-ready and seeking to fill relatively modest construction funding gaps. The objectives of our discussion are to explore some of what those projects are, their potential for project sponsors, investors, communities, as well as how states, green banks, and others are continuing to develop and finance them. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll dive into the suite of resources that make up RMI's Maintaining Momentum initiative, designed to connect project sponsors to alternative financing, as well as to one another, to help aggregate projects, reduce administrative and per unit costs, and attract additional investment. We'll showcase an 850+ clean energy project inventory, as well as insights and guidance for investors to assess those projects' bankabilities and their other potentials. CPE will share how states continue to catalyze investment into regional clean energy project pipelines, and S2 Strategies will give us the green bank perspective and their roadmap moving forward. Finally, the majority of our time will be discussion between RMI, CPE, Milken, and S2. We'll cover both what's working and what we still need in terms of policy, catalytic capital, and technical support for maintaining momentum. So RMI's Maintaining Momentum initiative began as we were supporting states, cities, electric co-ops, many others to strengthen the clean energy projects they were proposing to programs like Solar for All, Grid Resilience Innovation Partnerships, GRIP, and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That's just to name a few. Next slide, please. These programs received funding requests from far more viable projects than they could award. So mixed capital stacks were always key to implementing them. Behind these applications are drafted offtake agreements, businesses and developers ready to break ground. Besides their job and environmental benefits, they have real revenue potential. States, banks, foundations, other investors, there's so much to gain from realizing the upfront capital for these projects, but we also have to realize these projects are out there. So to support that, RMI dove into one illustrative implementation funding program. This was EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, CPRG. I'll now turn things over to my colleague Asia Salazar to share some of our insights.
Thank you, Anna. So through a Freedom of Information request, RMI accessed and reviewed 299 CPRG implementation applications, 274 of which did not secure grant funding. So we created a CPRG implementation grant project inventory, and we broke down these large, comprehensive, cross-sectoral applications into their individual project proposals and funding requests. And as you can see here, we did this with applications from all 50 states, including DC and Puerto Rico. And so, for example, we had a $191 million application from Oklahoma that was broken down into several smaller project funding requests in this inventory. So when the application was broke down further, it now can be found in our inventory as a $37 million request to support transmission and distribution, a $25 million request for a municipal solid waste to biogas project, and a $10 million solar farm project in rural co-op territories, just to name a few of the projects in that specific application. When you dive into this inventory, you can also find other Oklahoma-based clean energy projects, like an $11 million request for solar-powered charging stations in central Oklahoma, or the Indian Nations Council of Governments' $3 million request to weatherize energy insecure households. So applications were led, oops, sorry. Let me see my things messed up here. Apologies. So applications were led by 54 state agencies from 34 states and 37 counties, and 45 regional organizations in 19 tribes, as well as several air quality districts, public utilities, and universities, in addition to many more co-applicants. In addition to that, there were 48 multi-state proposals that really helped us grasp the type of coordination and partnerships that went into these applications. So we saw regional partnerships like the one between Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin to prop up a Midwestern industrial decarbonization grant program. But we also saw partnerships like the bipartisan 15-state coalition with a goal to start a solar plus storage program and support resilient energy across the country. When counting all of these partnerships and implementing partners, a state agency or representing city from every state in the country, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, were all a part of a CPRG implementation proposal. In addition to those formal implementing partners listed as co-applicants, there are letters of support from utilities, industry and labor groups, clean tech developers, and houses of worships, youth programs, and frontline organizations that are also ready to help roll out these initiatives. As for what the applicants sought to fund, electrifying public fleets and expanding EV charging were by far the most common project types. We also saw building efficiency and weatherization improvements as a close second. Reducing or utilizing anaerobic waste, particularly at landfills or industrial processing sites, were also common. By total funding request, community solar projects didn't make the top 10 measure types, but when we looked at total proposed projects, community solar showed up the most. So if you want to dive deeper into insights about these projects, we outline all of our findings and recommendations for next steps in our impact investment goldmine article. But for now, I will hand back to Anna to talk about some of the other resources that we pulled together.
Thanks, Asia. So everything Asia just shared is now publicly available. We released last month the CPRG Implementation Grant Project Inventory. Pictured here is the shorthand dashboard on our main page, and Bryn is sharing in the chat the links to these resources. You can use this shorthand to get a taste for where and what clean energy projects were submitted for implementation funding, as well as some key details, how much funding they needed, what they directly requested from CPRG, their projected emissions impacts. All of these give a really good indication for what they need in terms of their financial gap. Some of these projects were looking to be solely stood up by the grants. Many are just like looking for the difference in between what states, cities, developers are already standing up and creating something that is already in demand or would be needed, would be innovative. Next slide, please. You can also download the comprehensive CPRG inventory spreadsheet. So these are really everything that we mined from these applications. Both sources link you to the by the project, we've broken out full application PDF. So in those PDFs, you find the full project narrative, emissions impact modeling, those letters of support Asia mentioned to see, who are the suppliers, chambers of commerce, community organizations who or labor groups supported this, and want these projects realized. They speak to both the level of readiness of these projects as well as some of their market demand. You still need to dive a bit deeper, but this is a starting point to show some really high impact projects. Applicants also identified other potential funding sources when they were requesting this funding, like how they would complement the CPRG grant. You can see modeled benefits for low income and disadvantaged communities, lots of outcomes. Really, the uses are manifold and why we wanted to make it public, because there are plenty that we didn't think of. And we think both project sponsors, developers, investors will. To give one example, if you're a developer looking for states and communities to deploy solar, you can find where those applicants were looking for funding to implement those projects, had identified public land for the siting, are interested in buying the future electricity. If you're a project sponsor looking to bulk buy EVs, heat pumps, other technologies, while we still have these federal tax credits, you can aggregate these project types to find who and where were looking for funds to electrify a municipal fleet, and use those to do an estimate scale for what the demand would be, state level, regional level, or locally. Next slide, please. So from the perspective of an investor, this inventory offers those looking to expand their infrastructure or clean energy portfolio where much of the planning heavy lifting has already happened. There are business plans, community engagements, drafted power purchase agreements, lists of pre-qualified vendors. We call it an impact investment goldmine for many reasons. Several green banks and private equity firms are beginning to use the inventory. We're also sharing it with family foundations, municipal bond lenders, and the applicants themselves to see who else went after these things and has an opportunity to collaborate. We dove into some of the more bankable projects, or again, to illustrate what is inside these 862 in our article, What Investors Have to Gain from America's Backlog of Clean Energy Projects. And Bryn, thank you for sharing that in the chat. So for the states and other project sponsors behind these applications, we provided a range of strategies to realize the capital stack without federal grants. We broke down the applications into their fundable projects, and this shows that the vast majority are relatively facing moderate funding gaps. They do assume a different market and tax credit system than when they were first applied for. But again, like the revenue potential is here. Many only ask for less than $10 million. So blending financial strategies like green bonds, state revolving funds, engaging community lenders can really help these projects pencil out. Also bundling those projects so that applicants share risks. And this is something my co-panelists will share more about and what other states are doing for this. Also helps attract the right lender or equity investor to the size and focus of the project. Lastly, we developed several financial decision trees. So these are 8-step processes meant to walk project sponsors through how they might obtain public funds and guarantees that still exist out there, how they might attract a lower interest loan, concessionary financing based on the project profile, as well as just other questions to get to that full capital stack. We did this for a general clean energy project. I'm showing just like step 2. Bryn is sharing in the chat where you'll find all 4. These will be interactive tools at a later date. Right now, they are static images that you open up, but can be turned into PDFs and presentation materials. So you'll find these for fleet electrification plus charging infrastructure, public and low-income building efficiency accelerators, and community solar, the 3 most common types of projects that requested funding from CPRG. All right, so with that, or this quick summary of the resources that we now have out there, I'm going to hand it off to Advait Aaron from Center Public Enterprise to speak more on what states specifically are doing to maintain momentum.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Anna. First of all, big shout out to RMI for creating such a great database. I think at CPE, we're definitely going to be using this to see how our state governments, the ones we're working with, can actually help get some financing to those projects. Anyway, great to see you all here. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Advait. I'm the Senior Associate for Energy Finance here at the Center for Public Enterprise. And today we're going to talk about how we're helping states and green banks and local governments use their financial tools and information gathering capacities to catalyze investment into the clean energy project pipelines they want to create. Next slide. So first, I'll quickly summarize what the Center for Public Enterprise is. We're a think tank and consulting organization focused on developing finance solutions for both the housing and the energy sector. We work with housing finance agencies, green banks, state energy offices, local governments to help design financial models, to help them with capital stack planning, and to make sure they can actually gather information on how to support developers of projects to actually catalyze investment into these key sectors where affordability and supply are going to be really important over the next few years. We're the only think tank, at least organization that we know of, that's published an open source elective pay financial model, at least where elective pay eligible entities are concerned. That's been pretty useful. And with a lot of our contract partners, we've upgraded that model in really specific ways to make sure they can actually seek financing from the Loan Programs Office, from state governments, from capital markets, to make sure that elective pay eligible entities can really catalyze investment into these essential projects. Anyway, think of us as your thought partners in innovative finance. There's a lot more work we've been doing lately on some of the impacts of changes to federal policy that we'll talk about in a second. Next slide, please. So first, I want to quickly summarize the macroeconomic environment that we're in. I want to talk about why it's so urgent and so necessary to focus on state-level solutions to catalyzing investment. Next slide, please. I think first things first, you guys might have all seen the news recently that your electricity bills are set to spike within a few months. Everyone's at risk. The combination of data center load growth and rising gas prices means that Americans across the country, especially in poor, less served by clean energy communities, well, everyone's going to have to watch their wallets. Next slide, please. Some friends of ours at the macro consulting firm Employ America have done some research in looking into the data, and they found that states with more diversified energy mixes actually have lower electricity price appreciation. Energy diversity and clean energy are good for consumers, which is why it's important that states can actually take the first steps right now to deliver that to ratepayers, taxpayers, the like. Next slide, please. Now, federal policy is going to be making this harder for all the obvious reasons. I won't go through every single one of these. I'm sure you've all seen some news lately about tax credit phase-outs, regulatory changes to when construction needs to commence for tax credit eligibility. There's going to be fewer sources of federal funding available in the future for clean energy projects. And the combination of these hits against clean energy are going to make private investors and private market actors skittish about whether they should invest, whether they should build, about the demand pathways for clean energy projects, which means that states have to take steps forward when the federal government won't. They have to support public and private developers in mitigating the risk that assets will be stranded. They have to provide market-shaping finance in lieu of federal finance options. And states need to collaborate with other state governments to achieve their shared energy sector goals. Next slide. I want to talk very specifically about what I mean when I say stranded asset risk. Lots of projects, whether they're on RMI's CPRG list or elsewhere in other pipelines, are dependent on federal grants, tax credits, and loan programs. Now, grants and tax credits in particular are collateral for private investment, especially at the local level. If those disappear, private investment might disappear as well. And there are also limits on development of new energy sources. For example, where utilities are concerned, rising electricity bills might constrain utility regulators' willingness to allow for greater capital expenditure on new generation and new transmission. And for independent energy developers, they depend already very much on contracted offtake of their energy by really creditworthy buyers, such as those in the tech sector. That leaves us in an environment where we have less federal support for clean energy, less security for investors who are less willing to invest now, less political willingness to burden ratepayers with greater costs, and more dependence on a concentrated buyer's market for electricity. Next slide. So that gives us a chance to talk about how states can lead in the market. Here's what we need to know about state market shaping capacities. Next slide, please. We're looking for ways to figure out how states can substitute for federal sources of capital, defray rising electricity costs, rebalance the offtake market for developers. What CPE recommends in a package is that state governments and green banks and instrumentalities at the state level need to identify projects, build aggregated project pipelines, provide targeted support to developers, and work regionally rather than locally. Next slide. So we'll talk about the first things first, requests for information and requests for proposals. This is the best way that state governments and green banks can build a bench of qualified developers to work with, not just now, but by establishing and building collaborative relationships today in the future as well. RFIs and RFPs allow states to figure out what developers are actually trying to build projects and what their project pipelines are. And they allow state governments and green banks to figure out how they can support those developers in succeeding with building their projects. The outcome of project development matters now and in the future, and this is how states can get a handle on the market to make sure these projects succeed. We think states need to be asking developers really important and very specific questions about finance, not just how state financial tools can support these projects, but the kinds of financial structures and products that are most useful, because these will be different on a project by project level. We can also discuss the kinds of target markets that projects will be selling into, or the expected cash flow profiles. These will be essential so that state governments, regulators, and developers can all come to agreement on financial models for projects. It also allows states to get into view of what the supply chain for a project looks like. Can we get parts on time? Can we procure a contractor to build it? And finally, states need to figure out if projects can still qualify for federal tax credits and or elective pay, and the kind of further support that's needed. For example, if a project's going to be applying for elective pay with the IRS, does that project have a way to tide over any delays in the receipt of an elective payment from the IRS when staff capacity at the federal government's being cut? These are the kinds of things that states need to figure out right now. Next slide, please. Now, there are already lots of examples of this that CPE has actually worked on already. For example, we worked with the New York Power Authority to take their request for information and proposal and socialize it to a lot of other states. We designed Colorado Energy Office's proposal, and Arizona Finance Authority has a very similar one as well. All of these ask very similar questions about the kinds of financial structures, the supply chains, the cash flows that developers are looking towards. In fact, the New York Power Authority, our best example, was so successful that they now use their RFI and RFQ process to create a bench of about 89 pre-qualified developers, all of which New York Power Authority can call on to help them build their renewable energy pipeline, which is growing every single month. They're adding new projects to that pipeline. It's pretty impressive what this kind of information gathering exercise can do. Next slide, please. We're actually working on this with S2 right now. We're working on updating our model RFI document. On our website, CPE has a model RFI that we initially designed for states to go to the Loan Programs Office with to access a federal state risk sharing program. The future of that risk sharing program is uncertain, but the questions that states can ask on their RFIs remain the same. So through the CPE model RFI, we've been socializing this to states to get them to pay more attention to figuring out their development landscape. Next slide, please. Anyway, once states can figure out what the development landscape looks like, what the potential project pipelines are, they can deliver market shaping finance. We're working with Colorado right now on the responses to their RFI to see where they can deploy their geothermal industrial decarbonization tax credits, where they can deploy other state incentives as well. Colorado's got a lot more than tax credits, but here's an example. We're also working with New York Power Authority to support using their financial tools to build out their portfolio. We're working in California on State Bill 330 to do publicly financed transmission. Public development and public finance for clean energy draws in private investment as contractors and partners in these projects. States can also create special purpose vehicles to aggregate small projects. We looked at RMI's spreadsheet where a lot of projects were within the $10 to $50 million range. These are pretty small on an individual basis for private investors. But if states can aggregate those projects, you actually can secure better private financing. We're also looking at state dealership functions. In February, Climate United put together an EV trucking program at the Port of Long Beach, where they bought a bunch of EV trucks up front and leased them out to drivers around the Port of Long Beach for transiting for shipping. Now, this actually establishes a market in real time, but it requires entities like Climate United or the state government, if it wanted to get involved, to take upfront demand risk for technologies that I think the private sector is not ready or willing to use just yet for whatever market barriers that we discover. Next slide. Our preferred tool, of course, is the revolving fund. The revolving loan fund empowers states to recycle one-time appropriations towards critical projects, de-risking projects' construction risk, providing long-term financing, or providing liquidity buffers in case payments get missed from other market actors in a transaction. It is much better than a grant. If you use a grant once, it's gone. But if you take the grant and use it as collateral for investment, you can recycle your capital. Illinois is working on this right now through a facility called ISERF, Illinois Clean Energy Revolving Fund. And we've written a lot about revolving loan funds on our site as well. Next slide. Last but not least, we want to talk about regional collaboration. Energy markets already cross states, and our energy policy should too. CPE is working on a geothermal consortium across the Mountain West states, for example, to harmonize the ways that states can use their loan programs, tax incentives, land use policies, and offtake and regulation to actually support the development of this innovative clean energy resource. And we can do that with a lot of other clean energy resources as well. The absence of federal support allows states to fill in the gaps. Next slide, please. Here's a little diagram demonstrating how states can work together to create a special purpose vehicle at the regional level to aggregate a bunch of identical smaller projects. It's the same structure as what you'd have within a state, only this works across states. And we're not aware of any legal barriers that would prevent states from working together in this really catalytic manner. Last slide. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass it off to Bennett at S2. We've got a lot from him about the work that green banks are doing, and I'm really excited for you all to hear it. Thanks so much for listening into what CP has been working on. And of course, if you have any questions about these financial structures, feel free to get in touch. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks so much, Abby. That's awesome. And hello, everyone, and thanks so much to RMI for pulling all of this together. I'm Bennett Byerly, Director of Finance at S2 Strategies, and we as a firm serve as a secretariat to the U.S. Green Bank 50, or GB50. Today, I'll speak about how current policy landscape has only made the mission of green banking more urgent and more important than ever. We'll also discuss how green banks are responding to this really key moment and share a perspective on the critical role that they are playing in clean energy finance and energy momentum more broadly. Next slide, please. S2 Strategies is a clean energy consulting and policy advisory firm focused on implementing solutions where policy meets reality. We recognize that the gap between ambitious policy goals and actual implementation can be where the real change happens. And that's exactly where green banks operate. They're institutions that step in and fill gaps in clean energy finance and unlock greater investment in energy solutions. And we at S2 Strategies are proud and grateful to get to collaborate with the Green Bank 50. Next slide. The GB50 is the member-founded and member-driven organization composed of state, local, and regional green banks across the country. The GB50 includes a diverse array of members, including more than 50 organizations that serve nearly every state. Members include state-run green banks, public infrastructure funds, independent nonprofit green banks, and other quasi-public institutions. These green banks provide both financing and technical assistance for clean energy projects, especially focused on filling market gaps and serving low-income and disadvantaged communities. They serve red states and blue states, rural and tribal communities, and small and big cities alike, because the need for accessible green capital exists nationwide. The GB50's goals itself are to attract and raise capital to scale green bank investment nationwide, provide services that help green banks invest more efficiently and effectively, and stand strong for the mission of green banking by supporting the ecosystem as a whole. Next slide, please. So when local green banks thrive, communities win. And that becomes clear when you understand the different types of projects that green banks invest in. Green banking isn't just about clean energy. It's about affordable housing and energy burden relief for low-income families. It's about job creation and workforce development that connects local contractors with real projects and real work. And it's about health benefits from reduced air pollution and resilience against natural disasters. The dream is for each state, region, and community to have access to a self-sustaining green bank. These are institutions that don't just deploy capital once, but recycle and revolve it over time, leveraging private investment and creating lasting economic opportunity. These are really economic development engines that happen to finance clean energy projects. Next slide, please. Now, it is a very challenging time, to say the least, as the policy landscape has shifted dramatically over the past 6 months. While the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund remains tied up in litigation and energy tax credits face rapidly approaching deadlines and severe restrictions on their use, community energy needs are actually intensifying. Rising costs and federal budget cuts are creating a perfect storm where greater demand for solutions meets a reduced support to deliver them. And these are real headwinds. But here's what's key. While these headwinds don't make the jobs of green banks easier, they do make the mission of green banking more important and more urgent than ever before. Next slide, please. And there's another side to this. Green banks have proven remarkably resilient and adaptive in this moment, and they built real institutional strength over the past few years. The ecosystem continues to mature with unprecedented collaboration between green banks, as exemplified with the GB50. They've invested years in building the relationships that matter with communities, contractors, developers, and local partners, creating pipelines of projects even amidst federal policy shifts. Capital, both public and private, continues flowing through these trusted intermediaries. The green banking industry existed before the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's not stopping now. Next slide, please. So how are green banks meeting this moment? We like to say it's with a fierce urgency to commence construction. First, they're working with community partners, developers, and contractors to triage priorities and fast-track projects to maintain tax credit eligibility. They're sharing best practices and guidance to work with developers to safe harbor and start construction within these rapidly approaching tax credit windows. Time really is of the essence, and especially by collaborating nationwide, green banks are the institutions with the relationships and expertise to move quickly. They're coordinating regionally and nationally like never before, as the GB50 is convening working groups, sharing resources, analyzing the policy landscape, and developing financing strategies that can be applied in different markets across the country. Third, they're fundraising collectively, pursuing joint efforts to raise private capital, including from philanthropy and institutional investors, to finance at-risk project pipeline. They're pioneering ways to utilize impact-driven, low-cost subordinated debt, loan loss reserve funds, and limited public funding to attract more institutional capital, especially to these at-risk projects. And they're collaborating green bank to green bank, developing shared underwriting services, standardized financial products, and models of interstate collaboration. This also includes partnerships where early stage emerging green banks can develop project pipeline, originate deals, and then partner with larger green banks to learn through transaction as the larger green banks help underwrite, finance, and service those loans. This allows capital to stretch even farther across the green bank ecosystem as a whole, while also investing in new underserved markets at the same time. Next slide, please. And this isn't just about surviving the current moment. It's about building a sustainable green banking industry for the long run. Clean energy finance just got a lot more complicated, so communities really need trusted financing and technical assistance partners more than ever. Low-income communities are significantly impacted by these federal cuts, which increases the importance of community lending and overall community investment. And energy costs are rising while housing shortages persist, which elevates the need for solutions like energy efficiency projects, distributed energy, and building electrification. Next slide. So in response, green bank strategies are evolving. They're shifting products to prioritize the projects that deliver immediate community value and are financeable in the current policy environment. This includes projects like energy efficiency, behind-the-meter storage, investing in affordable housing, and resilience efforts. They're developing these new partnership models and creating a true ecosystem where smaller emerging green banks can play a role as a frontline clean energy sales team, driving a project origination in new markets, while larger green banks can leverage their expertise and balance sheets to support those projects. And they're maximizing the impact of capital across the ecosystem by standardizing financial products, sharing resources, and working to rapidly recycle capital that would have been impossible to achieve in isolation. Last slide, please. So there are a lot of ways to get involved here. If you're a state or local policymaker, your green bank needs capitalization. It needs resources and it needs dedicated staff to scale this impact at this key moment. If you're a project developer, connect with the green bank for financing and technical assistance and work together to better serve your local market. And if you represent private capital, philanthropy, or institutional investors, this is a key moment to drive capital through the green banking ecosystem, both to finance near-term project pipeline that might otherwise stall, and to continue investing in a clean energy finance ecosystem that is more inclusive, more effective, and stronger for the long run. I'd argue that the test of this ecosystem isn't just how it performs when everything goes according to plan. And trust me, ask any green banker, the past 6 months have not gone according to plan. But there is real creative and constructive opportunity at this moment. What we're seeing with green banks is infrastructure that's not just about surviving policy shifts, but adapting, collaborating, and improving. The communities that will maintain clean energy momentum in this environment are the ones with local institutions that understand their markets, have trusted relationships, and can quickly move capital when opportunities arise. And that's exactly what green banks provide, and they are essential institutions for maintaining momentum in clean energy right now. Thanks so much.
Thank you both for that. Bryn, are you able to spotlight all three panelists now? Or thank you. All right, we will shift to our panel discussion, really using what we covered in terms of strategies, best practices, to think of what are the other missing pieces to maintaining momentum. I would like to ask my first question to our panelist, Rachel Halfacre. If you could share with us one brief intro on Milken's Community Infrastructure Center and the 10,000 Communities Initiative. What do they offer smaller cities, communities looking to finance critical infrastructure and clean energy? We focused on states, but local, rural and local communities need to finance this work too.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anna. So number one, RMI just did the Lord's work of combing through and pulling all of these incredible projects out of the PDFs and into kind of the world. And so thank you for pulling that together and just +1 to everything from the CPE team and S2 strategies. So a little bit about our work. The Community Infrastructure Center is a free online platform out of the Milken Institute that we started about 2 years ago. It's not just for climate infrastructure. It's really focused on smaller scale community infrastructure writ large. It's inclusive of distributed energy, but also water, broadband, housing, mixed use, trails, because infrastructure is hard. And what we've been really focused on over the last several years is how to provide dedicated support through this pre-development set of activities that come before construction. So from navigating your feasibility studies to your site planning, to your site acquisition or interconnection, to even pulling together all of the different funding and financing sources. This is not a new problem that we've got in the clean energy space. So what we're really focused on at the CIC, and we've got about 1,500 organizations on the platform today, and over 400 projects and portfolios of projects that have been uploaded. 70% of those organizations are project sponsors. What we're really focused on is bringing these folks through a process to define the asset really, really clearly, identify your project's readiness, whether you are seeking capital and you're ready to go, or if you're a little bit earlier in the process and you need support to go through some of these earlier stage planning activities. Part of what we've been really focused on is defining what your current state of activities are so that you can go out and find that support, whether it's capital, capacity, or technical assistance. And so number one, the offering here that I would love to encourage folks to do is come to our platform, put in your projects, and really what our job is now going forward, especially in this moment, is connecting those projects to capital. So we've got over 100 capital providers directly on the platform, and we also are very lucky to have affiliate partners like S2 Strategies that have their own kind of member consortia. And what we're really, really focusing on is identifying what your financing gaps are very specifically, so we can find the right type of financing on the other side of that. So I know we're going to dig into a couple more questions, but that's a little bit more about our platform and how we're here to support you all on the call.
Thank you for that, Rachel. I want to follow up with what you shared with just one more question. So I understand that Milken has been supporting the development of a fund for the catalytic clean under a catalytic clean capital campaign. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so I think what's really important in this moment, Bennett said it really well. This is an all hands on deck moment. We are up against the clock, particularly around leveraging some of these tax credits. And in a moment of uncertainty, I think there have been kind of two schools of thought, which is one is really essential defense work has to happen. There are many communities entitled to their grants. They're entitled to the programs that they've been awarded. And then there's also a real need for organized and orchestrated deployment efforts. And so as we've been in this space for a while and we've been talking with capital providers, there is absolutely an opportunity to plug in state funding, to plug in impact capital, to come in and de-risk these transactions, even in a moment of uncertainty, because we know that there are green banks and CDFIs and native CDFIs and MDIs and credit unions and all of the acronyms that want to support these projects, but it's not yet clear where there are these catalytic and concessionary tools that can help these deals pencil. So a big part of what we're doing alongside Amalgamated and the National Bankers Association and many others on this call is really calling for a national campaign to organize $1 billion in catalytic capital to come into these transactions, whether it's the CPRG projects, whether it's the EPA's community change grant projects or BRIC projects or NREL's community power accelerator projects. There is no shortage of pipeline. And so what we're really trying to do is make sure that there are pathways to get this concessionary capital funneling into some of these different investable opportunities, like a few that Bennett outlined. So that's a little bit more about the campaign, and would love to share more with folks that are interested following this.
Thank you. Advait, you discussed how several states are using RFI's, requests for information, to create a pipeline of clean energy projects. Rachel just mentioned several others that have come out of IRA programs. What kinds of benefits are we already seeing from states that are leading on this kind of project aggregation?
Good question. I want to talk about the New York Power Authority, actually. That was the pioneer that we've been working with to socialize the request for information structure that we're recommending to all these other states. And when NYPA put together its RFI process last winter, I think last January was their first RFI. By April, they put out an RFQ. By I think September, October, they had already got 89 pre-qualified developers on their bench to work with for their pipeline. Then their strategic plan came out in October, November for their renewable energy pipeline, and it was already 3 gigawatts, 3.5 gigawatts large. They were not only using this RFI, RFQ process to pick up 89 pre-qualified developers to work with for their own projects, but also to support some of those developers' projects themselves, where now New York Power Authority would actually take a big financial stake in supporting the success of many of those developers' projects while building out its own pipeline by contracting out those developer services. The pipeline was about 3.5 gigawatts as of January, and just as of yesterday or 2 days ago, it's up to 7 gigawatts. Within only half a year, NYPA's worked with all these 89 developers to actually build the largest clean energy pipeline of a public power institution in this country. Of course, NYPA still got some obstacles here with respect to federal tax credits and elective pay and all of these, I think, federal policy changes. But where 7 gigawatts of renewables are concerned, this allows NYPA to set up a special purpose vehicle, raise finance on capital markets at pretty good terms, because these are lots of aggregated projects in one portfolio, and make sure that these projects are actually bankable, both to the state in a way that lowers costs for consumers and to investors who might be interested in working with NYPA in supporting these developers. Now, of course, New York has the benefit of having a large, I think, a strong commitment at the state level to pursuing the climate goals that they've set out in the CLCPA law. There's the Build Public Renewables Act. I think a lot of political intervention went into making sure that NYPA had the statutory authority and the political support and the mandate for really being ambitious about what they want to do with their RFI. But I think, this is the edge case that's the best one that we've seen so far. I think a lot of other states would do well to do something very similar.
And we can share in the chat some direct information about this project in particular. Bennett, I want to ask you, there are states part of the GB50, like Connecticut, that have been running green banks for nearly 15 years, but there are also those that are just about to release their first loans. So to what extent are the lessons learned that you're seeing being passed between states, and to what extent is each state kind of on its own journey here?
Absolutely. So yes, you're right. Very different institutions. What New York Green Bank and Connecticut Green Bank have done as leaders is very different than what the green banks that are getting started in Indiana, Iowa, South Carolina, and Texas are doing. And many of those newer green banks are actually independent nonprofits. Some of them may have a relationship with the state or may have a relationship with some municipality, but many of them operate also independently. But they can learn a lot from each other. And that's part of the design of the GB50 is to maximize the ability for folks to learn from each other's experiences. And there are three, key ways of collaborating that we want to highlight. One is on accelerating the startup efforts. There's a lot of the back office components of policies and procedures, strategies for developing pipeline, and understanding how to do underwriting and origination of these deals. And, that translates very effectively across states, even when it is with different markets. Secondly, you can really help share and standardize products. And this is really, really important for expanding the total clean energy investment market. The more that products are standardized, the more that we can attract institutional capital, sell off aggregated loans, really recycle capital and leverage secondary markets much more effectively. And so every green bank has a role to play in that collective effort. And then lastly, the green banking industry needs more capital all around. Some of the larger green banks can really help support the smaller and emerging ones by showing that their example is a really responsible use of public funding. They are able to recycle and grow it, and that example can translate across states. And when state legislators see, hey, this green bank was able to grow its balance sheet, it didn't lose taxpayer money, it actually did a lot better for us. Then that makes it more likely that they will extend support within their state. And then it also helps attract institutional capital, private capital, and other sources as well when green banks work together.
Absolutely. Kind of building on that, I want to ask a question to each of you. Rachel, if you wouldn't mind taking this first, Advait, and then Bennett. The CPRG implementation projects and the inventory we've released, this is only one example of the clean energy projects out there. There's also all of the PCAPS comprehensive projects behind them that didn't go after implementation funding first round, things that states and cities and utilities thought that they would build up further and apply for in the future. Again, there are a lot of these pipelines. Which ones, and I bet you referred to these as special purpose vehicles. I think we're all calling them different things, but I'm going to say SPP is probably my favorite acronym for it. So what are the pipelines out there that you guys are helping create or you're most excited about? And if you could share that, Rachel.
Yeah. So I shared a couple of different sources of aggregated pipeline, and now we have to do the gnarly job of parsing through that first set of pipeline to build a legitimately investable pipeline. And what I mean by that is a lot of these communities were following the instructions that they were given by these agencies, which is tell a very compelling story for a grant. What we are now calling on states, municipalities, tribes, counties, regional authorities, nonprofits, for-profits to do is it's time for a new narrative. And it's not just about grant funding anymore. It's about the investable opportunity that you are delivering to capital or to developers. And so whether it's coming from CPRG or BRIC or CCG or CPA, I think I got a lot of the origination platforms. What's really important is this next piece of activity, which is defining the assets and standard characteristics. like we've talked about, whether you're aggregating these projects to sell them off or securitize them in a bundle, or you're looking at them one by one, not all capital can do all projects. Period, full stop. Despite how much we might wish for that. And not only can they not do all project by asset class, they can't do it by product typology. So what's going to be really, really important is that within these pipelines, we're defining a couple key characteristics, which is number one, who is the ultimate borrower? If we are really talking about financing here, we have to name that. Number two, who is the owner and the operator of the system? That will dictate credits that you're eligible for, that will dictate financing that you're eligible for. And then three, what is that cash flow and what is the financeable kind of repayment strategy for that asset? Once you're able to define that for your pipeline, and I say pipeline as a sole developer that has, let's say, 70 million worth of rooftop solar projects, or you're an aggregator of 20 communities through one of these programs, that's the level of drilling down into that I'm really excited to see. Once we know that data, it becomes a heap easier to then connect it with the capital on the other side, who's been doing a lot of the work on saying, okay, we can do a bridge loan to an ITC, we can do mini perm, we can do commence construction loans, right? And so once we can marry those two, I think that's the type of pipeline and the structure that I get really excited about.
Sure. I'd be happy to pick this up next. And before I talk about, I think, my favorite pipelines, I just want to really echo, I think, everything Rachel's saying about the fact that not every pool of private capital is ready to go for every kind of project. I think, for example, when we're working on a project like geothermal, whether it's district heating or actually geothermal electricity pilots out west, there's a lot of capital that's not really sure if these projects even have cash flow waiting for them on the other side. And it's kind of important for states, green banks, local institutions to make sure that investors can get de-risked and get comfortable. But some investors in that same space would already be very comfortable with the de-risk solar project. Not all capital is as patient as it looks like they might be. A lot of states have the ability to help make capital work the way that they need it to by taking on that risk up front. So I want to make it really clear that mobilizing private capital is not a simple thing of just aggregating and hoping that investment will come. You really do need to make sure that the project characteristics match the risk return profile of the investors you're looking to get. Now, that being said, let's talk about some fun pipelines. What CPE has been working on a little bit lately are pipelines involving school solar projects and pipelines involving rooftop solar projects that we're looking to aggregate into special purpose vehicles. We've had a lot of conversations with schools, teachers unions, school districts about the potential of, say, building school solar and claiming elective pay. But a lot of schools not only don't have expertise building energy projects, but also they don't have expertise dealing with the IRS. A green bank is the perfect institution to take a bunch of individual school solar projects, aggregate them into a single pipeline, and actually make sure to finance them, claim the elective pay, mobilize private capital, and where needed, if schools can actually have battery assets and solar assets all owned by the same owner, you could actually turn this into a distributed energy system in a virtual power plant that sells excess energy back onto the grid, providing another revenue stream to whoever owns the asset. This is a pretty promising structure. We're also taking it to one of our other contract partners. This is a city that's had a lot of, I think, struggles with working in their larger electricity grid, and there's some blackout risks and so on. And I think turning what was initially conceived of as a microgrid resilience project into a virtual power plant project that involves a lot of batteries distributed across the publicly owned buildings, senior homes, religious centers, community centers. This actually not only provides the revenue stream of energy savings for consumers, especially on the public, but also a revenue stream from selling back onto the grid that has its reliability issues. These kinds of projects where you're aggregating what otherwise might be individually owned assets into a broader portfolio that actually has multiple revenue streams coming in, we're really looking forward to more of these transactions, especially as they become more and more necessary for marrying the needs of the grid with the needs of individuals who really need this kind of renewable energy, clean energy development in their communities.
A lot of great points from both of you, and I'll just quickly add that over the last few years we've done a lot of planning, and we can't let those plans sit on the shelf, and we really do need to get creative and make it happen. And I think that's a overarching theme in many ways. One other project pipeline I do want to talk about is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund had hundreds of community lenders all across the country that were preparing their own clean energy investment strategies and had project pipeline of varying stages of readiness. But oftentimes, the longest chunk of time that it took to develop that project pipeline was the actual building of community relationships. And so those relationships have made a lot of progress. They really exist now, and actually generating new projects is possible by leveraging those relationships. And when doing so, I think what we're seeing with a lot of green banks is they're thinking about what will win in this new future. The value of clean energy is really real. There are a lot of financeable projects out there, but you do need to be clear-eyed about the changing incentives that exist. But project types like efficiency, storage, affordable housing, et cetera, those are here to stay, and we will be able to find lots of viable project pipeline to come.
Oh, absolutely. And if I didn't say it enough in my presentation, I know I focused a lot on what the funding ask was, what the emissions reduction potential is, the contact lists, the fact that these letters of support, like, we want to see these projects. We are thinking of setting up a community land trust. We already have set up a community land trust. Like, that information, that not starting from scratch, one, to lose the buy-in is starting from, you're already starting in the negative. To try and recreate this in the future when we might have another grant opportunity is already too late. I'd like to ask one more question of each of you. But again, all right, so we're coming up on our last 3 minutes. I'm going to pull from the chat, and I know we've been answering the Q&A directly to you all, but we've also used some of the Q&A to adjust our own moderated questions. We talked a lot about rising energy costs and federal budget tightening, or Rachel, I'd like to start with you. If you could speak more to what clean energy in frontline and underserved communities is going to mean in the near term, and how do we get particularly family foundations to see these as opportunity investments?
Whew. Yeah, I think it's a really hard challenge, number one. There are a lot of deals that can pencil with the tax credits on the table right now, but that will not serve frontline communities that we have spent the last several years preparing for this investable kind of moment. I think the role of this philanthropic capital cannot be understated enough, particularly as it relates to community ownership for projects that don't have the same profile of repayment like a power purchase agreement. It's all the more challenging. But the parts that we really need to see is for these communities to own assets that they choose to own and that are a good fit for them. And those will just not pencil because of all of the great reasons that Andres shared earlier. And so not only is your philanthropic dollars going to be incredibly catalytic in this moment relative to the tax credits that are about to be off the table. So you're talking 30 to 70% leverage, which is already pretty amazing if we're looking at some of these numbers. But two, you're ensuring that the most vulnerable, the hardest region, often the most struck by climate change, that they have an opportunity to participate in this clean economy, that is shored up over the next 12 months. So my big message here is do not wait. These are incredibly vulnerable projects and communities, and without your capital, they will not pencil. So please, please, please get in the game.
I might add also on that point really quick that these projects that reduce energy costs, it's also about what you do with that money instead. So like using an example, like from the DC Green Bank financed a project at a theater. It had a bad HVAC system. It was really miserable to watch shows in that theater. And then through the DC Green Bank's intervention, that theater was able to save 10 grand per month, which allowed it to hire more staff, improve the experience of customers, and actually like really drive more revenue and more growth. And that's really just through a loan for a new heat pump and a new HVAC system. So it's an incredible catalytic moment that you can have, and these projects have real on the ground positive impacts.
It's a great theater for performances, by the way. I say that being in DC.
All right, you used your last comment for that, just a plug to, do you want to say the name of the theater? Is it okay if we do?
Oh yeah, it's the Howard Theater. Yeah.
Great. We're a mix of people in DC and New York, but I would like to say in there, I'm just like blown away by the diversity and geography and different types of agencies, investors who have joined us in the audience. We had a few questions that we had meant to bring up to the panel. I will follow up with you, Tim and Kelsey, asking about MUSH opportunities for green banks, medical hospitals, universities, as well as what are the major barriers if states, two states having the resources themselves to step into that breach of federal funding. That report is being written as we speak, so I will follow up with you with a blog very soon, Kelsey. This is also pretty real and fast, and we're each kind of in many ways thinking how to be proactive to what may come next for maintaining momentum. So this is a launch. I've been so pleased to be joined by the speakers and want to thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys for putting this together, Team RMI. Really lovely conversation you guys have organized.
Yep, thank you. It was great.
Looking forward to see you all on the Maintaining Momentum website, and the other networks we've discussed. Have a good day.